Thanks so much for listening. Before getting into today's episode, I just wanted to let you know that I would love to add value to you, your organization, and those you serve through speaking, training, professional development, or coaching. I've been fortunate to work with those in higher education, pre-K-12, and more recently, the corporate space. To learn more, visit my website at cjleadership.com or send me an email at chris@cjleadership.com. I can't wait to hear from you, and now on to our episode. Welcome back, friends, to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. As you know, always so happy that you take time out of your busy schedule to not only improve yourself as a leader, but also those that you serve. Really excited today, as always, have a wonderful guest, a dear friend and colleague with a great background. Truly, I think what he will tell you, like a lot of us listening, an educator at heart, and is going to just have a lot to pour into you. So my guest today is Dr. Rodrick Lucero. Dr. Lucero started his career as a high school history teacher and coach in Colorado, then moved into high school district level administration. After earning his PhD in 2005, Dr. Lucero moved to Colorado State University, where he served as a professor and co-director for the School of Teacher Education and Principal Preparation. Then took a move to a national position, becoming the vice president for the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, or AACTE, where he was the lead author of the Clinical Practice Commission report released in January 2018. He then served as a consultant for Cedar Center until taking on his newest role at Texas A&M University in College Station. He also continues to serve as the president and CEO of the National Center for Clinical Practice and Educator Preparation, working with colleagues around the country to improve the quality, infrastructure, and delivery mechanisms for educator preparation programs. Oh, Rod, how are you doing? Welcome to the show today.
Chris, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate
it's great to have you on. Rod and I've known him certainly since I started my job at Fort Hays State. We had some mutual colleagues and friends through accreditation work. And then shortly after I started, Rod started the National Center for Clinical Practice, which we'll talk about today. If you are in teacher preparation or know friends that are, and I'll just say they need to know the great things that Rod and his team, which I'm very thankful to be a part of, are doing and have already done. So as people can see here, or they can heard in your background, maybe somewhat similar to me, is started in K-12, you went into administration, been in higher education, have led at the national level, really have your finger on the pulse of what is going on in terms of educational policy, teacher preparation, all the things. You lived inside the Beltway, you know how all of that works. We can go a lot of directions today, but I always like to start with my guest is just give me and our listeners just a little bit of your leadership journey, because you have led in so many ways at so many levels. What does your leadership journey look like?
Well, Chris, thank you for that. I think the way to start is my leadership journey has started in and continues to be in the same place, and that is that I'm a teacher. My heart and my mind is always about teaching and those people that we prepare to be in front of our kiddos in the profession. I really bought into in my formative years in high school and even junior high and elementary school. I bought into the narrative that teachers affect the future. And I believe that wholeheartedly. You know, every academic, every politician, every professional athlete has their foundations in education. And so the fertile soil and the incredible influence that we have as educators creates incredible rights, also creates incredible responsibilities. And so that has been the cornerstone of my response, whether as a classroom high school teacher, moving into the university system, having taught all levels, undergrad, graduate courses, and doctoral courses, and serving on many doctoral committees over my career, kind of led me into into the Beltway, as you noted, the national Pictures obviously very different, but there's a whole lot of similarities. And what I found in if you tether away or peel away some of the onion and some of the noise, you start to realize that there are a lot of people with a lot of different perspectives, but we're all working in the same direction. And when you have that kind of common denominator, you start to find that you can really do good work.
Well, and thank you for that. And by the way, Rod's being very humble because if I'm not mistaken, I told you that he was an admin and teacher in Colorado, but I think you were also something like the principal of the year. Is that correct?
I was a teacher of the year as
Teacher of the year. Yeah, that's no small feat.
and then assistant principal of the year as well. So
And you were at a very large high school, correct?
that's correct. I was at Fort Collins High School in Fort Collins, Colorado.
And so for our friends listening, certainly the K-12 people, you understand from just a size standpoint what that entails. And not only did Rod do it, we did it very successful. I really like what you said there. First of all, you're a teacher at heart. I've said no matter what I do, if I stay somewhat related to a school, I'm an educator at heart. And so let's just jump into that because, on one hand, I'm glad that you said at the end of the day, a lot of us are actually working towards the same thing. And if you were to walk the halls right now in a school, I would like to think what you and I would observe, the conversations we would have, by and large, would be somewhat similar to what they would have been a few years ago. To some extent, you might not be able to tell what some of the factors going on outside the schoolhouse are. But nonetheless, those of us that aren't in K-12, if all we get are sound bites and headlines, our perception may not be accurate. You're clearly an expert in this area. What is your response when people say teaching isn't a great profession anymore? But what is your response if you standing in the grocery line and somebody says, "Oh, you couldn't pay me enough to be a teacher," or, "I hear that's just not a great profession anymore." What's your response?
It's I typically try not to invade on people's conversations, but if do hear that conversation, I do invade the conversation. And part of that is to, whether we're in the grocery store or in our classrooms or on campus anywhere, it's our responsibility to stand up for the profession because we know the worth of the profession. Yeah, it's hard work. Yeah, we don't get paid what we should be getting paid as professionals. However, neither of those are why we came into the profession. We came into the profession to make a difference. And if we can hold on to that idealism through the pain of not getting paid a lot and a lot of hours and those kinds of things, then we realize that we become very rich, very wealthy, perhaps not in a financial way, but in a bigger way, that we've made a difference in the world, that our lives on this earth will have mattered because we were teachers. I can't imagine a better pay than that. That being said, I still continue to advocate for higher pay for teachers. It's amazing to me and I'm going to mess up the statistics, so don't quote me on this, but it's somewhere around this area, that 28 that if you start teaching in 28 states in this country, that you start under the poverty level. So if you're somebody of color or were raised in poverty or near poverty and you really want to be a teacher, you want to give back, what's your incentive to be a teacher? Yeah, there is none. To go back into poverty makes zero sense. If you had a chance to go to college, why would you go back into poverty? So we've got to be better about that. As a society, we have got to put our money where our mouth is. Almost the PDK, Phi Delta Kappa does a poll every year, and in every one of their polls, every year since they've done the poll, and I believe that's for over 30 years now, this is a national poll, report that the most important adults in their kids' lives, other than the parents, are their kids' teachers, and that their kids' teachers are excellent. Their homeschool is excellent. Now, the other thing that the poll shows is they see other schools as not as good as their own home school. So that dichotomy is interesting in the data because we like what we have for ourselves, and it's easy to kind of malign and listen to those sound bites that you noted and what the politicians want us to believe about education. The bottom line is this: is kids are kids, our kids are kids. If you're walking down a hallway, you don't know if a kid's Republican or Democrat or their parents, and nor do you care. It's about sharing and building that relationship with that kiddo and taking them from where they are to where they need to be. Now, that might be a behavioral piece, it might be an academic piece, it might be an ethical piece, but that's what we do as educators. And that's why the role modeling is so important. Kids watch what we do. We can say it all day long, but if we don't walk our talk, we're we're bereft in our work. So I'm recalling your question brings to mind a situation when I worked in Washington, D.C. It was a snow day, and a gal behind me was a was talking to another gal behind me. So they were the two ladies right behind me as I'm checking out, and it was a snow day, so I had to be there to get milk and bread. It's just what you have to do on a snow day. So I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I hear these ladies talking, and the lady behind me was talking to the lady behind her and said, "Well, what do you do?" And she said, "Well, I'm just a kindergarten teacher." And so I'm just kind of listening, and she said, "Oh, ma'am, you're not just a kindergarten teacher. My son's kindergarten teacher literally saved our family. He had ADHD. He wasn't paying attention. He had no compensatory skills, and he was really tearing our marriage apart. Really destroying our family unit." And the teacher looks at this lady and she said, I've been doing this for 22 years." And no one ever told me that I mattered. So, of course, then I have to pipe in. And I looked at her and I said, I'm an educator preparer. I prepare educators for the field. And I said, you matter more than you'll ever know. And those kids, some will come back to you, some may never. But the one day that you took a chance and gave them a hug or a high five or a knuckle bump or recognized that they tried a little harder on that test or that spelling, whatever it was, that's where that matters. And that's lifts every child. And when we lift every child, then we lift society. And I think that that's really the bottom line, is that we have an opportunity as educators to lift everyone, and we matter. And it's important that we understand that we matter as educators, every single one of us. And when I say educators, it could be a custodian, it could be the principal secretary. We are all educators when we're in schools, just period.
Couldn't agree more, and I echo that sentiment. Is nobody is just anything, but certainly I'm just a teacher. I'm not even the principal or superintendent, and no, you're probably one of the most influential people in the building. And those that are K-12 teachers, I'm a high school teacher. I'll freely admit this. Certainly a kindergarten teacher. God bless them. That is a hard job. And I think people listening now, if I were to say, think back to your best teachers, we all share that in common. That's a common vernacular, even if you didn't go into education like Rod and I did, that our lives have been affected by that. So with that, then I guess I'll jump in to maybe a policy question. Is obviously strong advocate for schools, strong advocate for funding our schools and our teachers. I agree. We need to get to where our teachers across the board are paid more. As probably the closest thing that I personally have to a DC insider, Rod, what does it take? Especially education, which we know, I always tell people, if you want to affect education, start with your local school board.
Mhm.
Start with your community. So knowing that we can affect education where we're at, but also, the national level, what do you think it would take for us as a country to say we are going to pay our teachers more? What would that take?
Boy, that's $1 million question, isn't it? I think a couple of things. We need to create the argument in a more compelling way than we've done in the past. Part of that issue is that we have 50 different departments of education in this country. As you're aware, education is a constitutional right, but it is relegated to the 10th Amendment, which says that if it's not directly stated in the Constitution, then it becomes a state's right. Education falls within that wheelhouse, in that it is not specifically explicated in the Constitution, but it is a 10th Amendment right. Education is the right of each state. So we have 50 plus departments of education that do it differently. We need to, and that's, I thought when I kind of studied the Constitution as a history teacher, and I thought that was a really good idea. However, there needs to be some common, and in our world, we're at the internet and travel, we can travel to DC quickly, we can travel to anywhere quick. We have to be better about a professional vernacular, a lexicon of practice, if you will. We need to be better about seeing ourselves as one profession working for the good of society and how we're creating citizens for a multicultural, multilingual society. I mean, that's what we live in. And so, how do we prepare students for that? Anything short of that, Chris, is indoctrination. And so, one of the important points that I'd like to get across today is, does your school indoctrinate students or do they educate students? Indoctrination sanitizes some history, for example. It's easier to teach because you're picking and choosing, you're cherry picking, to use a word. But not all history or not all things that we study are comfortable. But we have to be able to realize what's uncomfortable about our past in order to figure it out for our future. And that's what education is about. It's about the breadth and depth of life, and not all of life is pretty. And so we have to ensure that students are exposed to the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there is good, and there is bad, and there is ugly, but that's education. And so when we hold that up and make that compelling case across the 50 states, then I think we're starting to make a difference. I always had hoped that we would have a strong Secretary of Education that would help lead that charge, and I think we had that in Dr. Cardona under the last administration. It certainly doesn't help us when chief executive in this country chooses a Secretary of Education who is not an educator. So I think, Chris, to answer your question, we have to be better about making a compelling, unified argument and making the case to the American people. It's not going to happen from the halls of Congress. It's got to be much more organic and much more from the trenches. I thought we were getting there as came out of COVID. So we understood once COVID hit, we understood the economic ramifications as the country shut down because parents couldn't go to work because their kids were at home. We started to understand how important kids are to democratic societies. I think that some things have changed. Respect for the profession, maybe not so much. Not, or at least not as much as I had hoped.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think, yeah, it's all a matter, we all need to be advocates. And I think I too hope that we get a day where there is a standard minimum salary for our teachers, because those that have done it, it is as rewarding as it can be challenging, as it can be tiring, all of those things. And so, kind of shifting a little bit within that, you've done quite a bit both as an educator in K-12 and then also in higher ed, currently in higher ed, and then also as the CEO of the National Center for Clinical and Educator Preparation. So let's talk a little bit about that for those that are watching. You have that on your background, and I'm fortunate that I was one of the first board members, and I'm real proud of the work that we've done, and I think we'll continue to do. Whether our listeners are in higher ed, in education or not, certainly, hey, if you're in higher education, if you're not in the College of Ed, send this to your friends in the College of Ed because they need to know about the National Center of Clinical Practice. The folks that are on there, including Rod and many others, if you look at that Clinical Practice Commission report, you're going to see their names on it. And that's a pretty important document that certainly guides how we do clinical practice at my university and hopefully should across the country. So, Rod, tell us what the impetus was for the National Center for Clinical Practice in Educator Preparation and what you would like others to know about it.
Great. Thanks for that question, Chris. The center was designed to advocate for and to help implement the theoretical protocols of clinical practice. The Clinical Practice Commission report was formed as an implementation strategy after the 2010 NCATE Blue Ribbon Panel report, advocating in a theoretical way what clinical practice was for and why it is important when we teach, as we're teaching teachers. But it was a theoretical piece. It was very hard to implement. It was really hard to get a hold of. So when the Clinical Practice Commission met for about 4 or 5 years, it was a group of 48 of us that worked for pre-K 12, higher ed, all positions within. We had several business people, a couple of parents on the commission. And when we came together, again, we started to realize that if we could write the perfect way to prepare teachers, clinical practice gives us the best shot at that. So we wrote different proclamations with tenets under each proclamation, basically kind of basically saying, if you have clinical practice, if you think you have clinical practice, do you have these levers? If you have these levers in place, then yes, indeed you do. It was a really great validating document. It's aging out a bit, I think. However, what I find in my work is that people are using it. I'll use the state of Connecticut, for example, where Dr. Cardona was prior to his stint as as the Secretary of Education. They had adopted the Clinical Practice Commission report as the framework for their statewide goals in education. Unfortunately, when after I left AACTE, the organization took a bit of a pivot and didn't do as much with clinical practice as we might have hoped. So, in my effort to make sure the research was valued and honored, and the work that had been done by the commission was honored, we started the National Center for Clinical Practice and Educator Preparation. I did so with my colleague at the time, Amanda Lester, and if she's listening, hi Amanda. She and I formed the organization and brought others in that had been part of the Clinical Practice Commission report, the writing of that document. Unfortunately, Amanda had to resign her role over conflict of interest with her full-time paid role at the state ed in New York. But we continue to work, and our goals are to help. And we're kind of expanding our focus. Chris, as you know, we're going to be meeting over this course of this year. Our work is to create a more succinct strategic plan with the goal that we want to still focus on clinical practice. But there are also a lot of other needs that states need, that EPPs need, that pre-K 12 need. So there's some specific kinds of work that we can do as external experts to come in. And the idea here is that sometimes you might be the best leader in the world, the best expert at something in the world. However, it's really hard to change people in your own backyard. And so what's nice is we can be hired to come in and provide for a leader, a dean, a provost, a president, a department chair to say, these are the things that we observe, and here are some recommendations for improvement. The nice part is that our recommendations hold. We don't have any authority to tell them what to do, but we have, as objective observers, have some power in that we can be objective and also provide recommendations that the leadership can choose to work on or not. We had an opportunity to work with the Professional Educator Standards Board in the state of Washington around two threads, if you will. The first thread was to help them create a mentorship process and create a case for mentorship so that the executive director might be able to take that to the legislature and find some pay for teachers who wanted leadership but didn't want to necessarily go into administration. The second part of that work was to convene a year-long professional learning community network with the EPPs across the state of Washington um, to look at their program review process. The executive director really felt strongly that it was like when they would do the reviews, the review was very disconnected to the real practice of EPPs because there was no conversation prior. And so, what an opportunity for EPPs to come into the state institution to say, yeah, that doesn't work for us, or that's really not what we do, or that's really passe, or that's theoretically changed. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to provide some recommendations to that organization in the state of Washington. So that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to situate ourselves to be a support and help. And the folks that we have as directors, like Chris himself and the others, we all work in the universities across the country, but we all have a passion for teaching and a real passion for the relationships that are inherent in the work. So, the question I have to EPPs is, what do you need an external reviewer to do? And it's not an accreditation, it's not evaluative. It's simply, what problem of practice are you working on? Let us come in and look at it, and we'll give you some recommendations. It might be in course sequencing. It could be in simply scheduling. One of the things that we're dealing with at Texas A&M is, how do we create a really robust, strong secondary program out of a minor and make it a major here? So there's challenges certainly, and we learn all the time that because we're able to bring and kind of coalesce around a variety of institutional models, successful. So we're excited about that work, and we get really excited to work with other institutions that are looking at their own continuous improvement process.
And again, for those listening that are either in teacher preparation or know of those that work in that field, it's a great organization. Even if I weren't on the board and have helped with it, I can tell you that early on, when Rod in Midwest terms, you pretty much just lived down the street from where I was at in Kansas. I mean, it was straight down the street, albeit about 5 hours. But I can tell you, I have firsthand proof of concept on this, that where I work and where I serve, we're real proud of our teacher prep program. But we were at a place where we wanted to implement those proclamations with a little more fidelity. And Rod came, and it was a summer meeting that we had with area superintendents, principals, and our faculty. And like he said, it's not judgmental. It is collaborative, and it really gets everyone in the room saying what is best for students, certainly through how we prepare our teachers. Because at the end of the day, and I think Rod would agree with this, is from a business standpoint, most colleges and universities, who's our end user? If we're the accountancy or pre-engineering. Well, when we prepare teachers, our end user, while most might say it's the school, that's true to some degree, but it's actually that kid in the desk. And so we're all on the same page. And I can tell Rod that we continue to work to rely on that work and those suggestions. And to say it's overhauled our clinical practice is an understatement, because we are now focused on doing things that we know that the research says is what we should be doing. And those that know about my day job out no, we have a really large program where I serve as a chair, and we're all over the country. And so it's critically important that we have sound practices for clinical practice.
And Chris, to your point, this is well researched. This is the stuff we're making up. Pedagogy is our science. And oftentimes in education, we don't leverage our science enough. We're not making this stuff up. This is all proven and it's evidence based. These are evidence based practices that we utilize and advocate for that make a difference in the outcomes for kids across the board, regardless of what those students come to us with. We're able to help them grow at the level that they're able throughout the course of their career in schools. So talk about usefulness, helping students
Hmm.
useful and feel useful as fully engaged and empowered citizens in this democratic society.
Yeah, I think it's again, just to reinforce it, it's been so helpful for us, and by natural design, it has influenced our so the K-12 classrooms that we work with, obviously they're doing great things, but for us to come alongside and say, well, this is what we are asking our students to do, I can tell you personally, it's been well received, and it is more in line with what a real teacher does in the hallway, or what they do when students have a problem. Or for those of you that aren't in teacher prep, one thing that we talk about are what we call look fors, is what are we looking for in the life cycle or the day of a teacher or a student. And that's been very helpful. So again, I'll put the show notes, these links, because if you're in our world, you know what we're talking about. If not, share it with those that are. And Rod, one thing I'd like to also talk about, because it's clear, and I think our listeners will and viewers will see, one, you're an educator at heart. You're committed, as we say in education, to helping every kid every day. And because of that, one thing, focusing really, I guess, more specifically on leadership style, you gave a little bit about your leadership journey. One thing that I've been able to witness is one of your many leadership strengths is that you're very good at not only assembling a team, but doing so in a way that the strengths of everyone complement each other, and setting the vision, but in a good way. You let them work within that vision. Was that somewhat natural for you? Did you learn that from mentors? I guess, what are your thoughts on that? Because it's a very effective style, and I would have said that even if I weren't part of a team that you put together, that you're good at getting team members on. But nonetheless, I've noticed that is whether it's at the national level, at a high school, now at Texas A&M. I guess just comment on that and the extent to which you were able to learn or refine that practice of leadership.
Well, thanks for noting that. Sometimes I feel successful in that paradigm and sometimes I don't. What I've really come to understand in my 40 years in this profession is that everybody is coming at it with their best intentions forward. And while we may disagree, sometimes in that disagreement is the answer to a problem of practice that we've really been struggling with. So I've learned to embrace differences and complementary styles. So when I invited folks to join the directors on the center, one of those areas was about passion and passion for teaching and education. The other is, do they understand the leadership concept of letting your ego go? That come into this without an ego, without a need for power and control, and an ability to share the successes and the failures. The center hasn't. We've had some failures, certainly, as any business and any organization, but we're lucky enough that most of our work has been very successful. So it's that, and being able to take that chance to not surround yourself with an echo chamber. I think echo chambers in leadership are a death knell. I think that is the absolute worst thing you can do, is to surround yourself with people who are just like you, because the world isn't just like any one of us, right? And so I think having different perspectives and inviting in, where I learned this, Chris, this is leveraging pedagogy. You get the kid in the class, in your classroom. I remember a student in particular that was a tough student, really, really rough. And she used a lot of foul language and was just really kind of socially inept, and a bunch of things. Anyway, one of the things that I did was I empowered her in the classroom. I said, if you need to leave, you have a pass for 4 minutes. You can leave and give yourself a timeout for 4 minutes and come back. You can use those twice in an hour in a class period. I said, but I want you to sit in the front and I want you to help me with things like passing out papers or passing out tests. And if I need you to run to the office, I need to be able to trust that you're going to run to the office and come back. And so by putting my trust in that student, it came back tenfold. But if I were approaching that with an ego, that would never have happened, because it would have been a power struggle. And I would have, the first time she said the F word, for example, it would have been a march to the office. Marching to the office isn't very good, because you're the one as a teacher, you're the one with the relationship with that student. So you learn how to do those things. And then as adults, when you have that difficult adult that you're working with, it's similar. Empower them, engage them, give them a path to engage. And that becomes empowerment. And that's when we start to change systems. You asked earlier about policy. I'll be in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill next week, and hopefully able to meet with legislators who may be pro education, who may not be pro public education. Either way, they're conversations that we need to be able to have, again, to take them from where they are, to where we'd like them to be, in terms of understanding the role of public education in the United States from the inside. Sometimes we're not real good about always telling people what it is we do. We close our classroom doors, we do great things, and the kids go home and you start over the next day. Well, it's time for us to really talk about, and that's what I love about your podcast, Chris. I think it's just a stroke of genius to be able to talk about education in way from the insider's view. The other thing I'm just, this might be a little bit tangential, but I was talking to a student the other day, and she's like, I'm not sure that teaching cut out for me. I'm not sure if I want to graduate with a teaching license or a teaching certificate. And my comment to her was, well, you're far in. She was a second semester senior. So, I said, it will behoove you to finish, because the skills that you've learned to become a teacher will be skills that you can use as a leader in any profession. They are transferable skills that will help you as an academic, as a dental hygienist, as a clerk in a shop. Those skills will help you anywhere you go. And so finish it out and finish the degree, and then make a decision. But you always have it to come back to then.
Couldn't agree more. I didn't tell Rod to do this, but the book that I have coming out sometime in the fall of 2025 is Teacher Leadership. And that's the main premise, is if you are a trained teacher, you are a natural leader. You may not realize it, because I've said, and I think Rod would agree, and I don't mean this in a demeaning way, is everything, that poem, everything I learned I need to know about life I learned in kindergarten. Most of what I needed to know about actual leadership and working with other people and developing relationships and holding them accountable and all of that, I learned as a teacher. I learned as a teacher, and whether I learned it, as a had I been an elementary teacher or high school teacher, doesn't mean that you treat the adult in the room as if they're 5 or 6 years old. But I am telling you, and Rod hit the nail on the head, is that teachers, because our preparation is so eclectic, we have to know a little. We have to wear all the hats. And I've often said, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, COVID also, when teachers were either asked to do a lot of things or for whatever reason, some decided, it was time to look elsewhere. It revealed that teachers, before content creator was a thing, teachers have been content creators since the schoolhouse opened, right? I mean, you talk about creating content that people can understand, digest, and recall later. Yeah, I think that's teaching.
We call it a lesson plan.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Content creation. Absolutely.
And I appreciate that. And the other thing that you said, and this is so spot on with all leadership, and you were referencing the student, is the power of assuming positive intent. Assume that student was going to, have good intentions, behave, you didn't judge them. And some people might disagree with me on this, but I think the best way to trust somebody is to trust them,
Yeah.
right? Is trust them, because as Ken Blanchard says, the opposite of trust is not mistrust, it's control. And so really great leadership nuggets there of assume people are doing the right thing until they show you they're not, and then trust them. You'll be amazed. My hunch is that student, after a while, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I'll bet you they didn't take both 4-minute passes every day.
They started, and then by the end of the semester, they wouldn't leave. I couldn't pay them to leave. And
Yep.
that particular student took a class from me every year that she was in high school. So, Anne was my TA at her senior year and had just completely turned around. Trust, you're 100% right. Trust, you just got to trust. And your fear of them letting you down is much more about you than about them. It's really trust folks to do the right thing. You're going to get met. You're going to get, it's going to get like in a classroom. I would purposely, the first time I gave a test in any class, I would purposely leave the room, go grab a cup of coffee or whatever. Now, I understand the liabilities and all that kind of stuff, but I wouldn't go far. But I wanted the students to know that I trusted them to share their knowledge on the exam. And so I had, several students that I would ask later, like, hey, do people cheat when I leave? You're the class that they don't cheat. Like they absolutely won't, because you trust them not to. Now in my whole high school teaching career, did some students cheat? I am sure of it. But to me, trusting the 98% that we were doing the right thing was much better than distrusting 100% of it.
Yeah. I mean, in any organization, we talk about the bell curve. There's
Yeah.
always going to be that on the, I guess, the left side, if you're picturing it, that you could be the best whatever in the world, teacher, leader, whatever, they're where they're at. Focus on the majority. That's who you're going to influence.
And
And it,
so much of what we do is even in our society, we focus on the negative. We focus on, I hear the diatribe about immigrants from other countries coming into our country and breaking the law. And certainly that's true. So there are some that do that. Are the majority doing that? No. The same is true with our own society. Are all kids bad? No. Most kids are really good. And so, but we tend to start to skew towards the negative and not the positive. And at
uh,
school, we can do the opposite.
and I have, colleagues and friends that are in the, I guess, the space of being content creators and influencers in K-12. And we've talked and I encourage, if you're a teacher right now, whatever your social media platform is, post a TikTok about why you love teaching, right? Is because I do think if we walked in a school on any given afternoon, the majority of the teachers, I'm not saying they're not going to be tired, because at times they are. I'm not going to say it's not going to be frustrating. It's a hard job, but the majority of them like their job and love their kids. And it only takes one or two to change the perception and maybe even the narrative that people quote unquote hate teaching, or we have a teaching problem. And as we've learned today, obviously there are things we can always do to improve any profession, certainly the teaching profession. But my hope here, Rod, as our time has kind of flown by as it comes to a close here, is that those that are in our field, I think they've understood and this has resonated at a different level. Those that are not, I hope too, one word that I think Rod would say is one of the many great words that describes him, but when it comes to teacher prep students education is advocacy. And if anything, if this has given you some nuggets of wisdom to take away, think differently, focus on the positive. How can we all advocate for the kids in our schools in our local communities? That can be as simple as having a bias for yes when you vote for a bond. It can be the decision to assume positive intent when your kid's teacher does something that they don't like. I don't know, but I think in those little ways, and then obviously in bigger ways, advocating for teacher pay, advocating to support our schools any way that we can. Rod, as we close out, any final thing that you would like to share or expand upon for our listeners?
Chris, I think I might want to go back to the comment about when you're teaching, when you're actively educating and in front of a classroom, or when you're a parent watching your own children and their teachers, ensure that they are being educated and not indoctrinated. That distinction, I think, is a really important one. We need indoctrination is really taking the world and taking pieces out of it and teaching those pieces. Then you don't have a whole context within which to work. You don't have a sense of all of the other people that you're going to work with and come across, and cultures and activities that you're going to come across for the rest of your life. We need education. We need the depth and breadth of life reflected in our classrooms. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask. Teachers, don't be afraid to ask parents to help, to be part of the solution to any problems that we have. Parents, don't be afraid to ask teachers. Don't be afraid to ask your administrators. Don't be afraid to ask your professors. We are all in this together. One of the biggest fallacies, and Chris, you and I have talked about this a bit, is the myth that pre-K and higher ed are different. We are all on a spectrum of services that focuses on learning, from in utero in some ways, all the way to the moment we take our last breath. We're always learning. And so that's what professors and teachers have in common. We are all in the business of learning. What a great way to spend your life. I mean, really, it keeps you young. You're learning all these great things. You laugh a lot. You have really reflective conversations, and you become a deeper thinker. And it's a pretty good life, honestly.
I couldn't agree more. I think about just the wonderful stories that we all have from being in education. And they're stories that either make you laugh or they're rewarding. And so yeah, thank you for sharing that because it further sheds light on the great things happening every day. I would say culture and climate has really performed one habit, one word, one action at a time. And I think collectively, most of what's going on, most of what our educators are doing pre-K through, I think 16 or 20, whatever the number is now, we're here. There are other things we could do for a living, right? But we choose to be in education. So whoever you are, somebody in the school system. Hopefully this has encouraged you to think maybe a little differently. Encourage you to, even next time you see them at the grocery store, let them know they're not just a teacher. Shoot them a text of encouragement. Volunteer at your local school for something. I don't know if it's encourage you to do one thing differently to support kids in our schools, and then I think we will have been successful. Well, Rod, this has been wonderful, and I know people that listening have this is going to add value to them. They're going to learn if they want to go to the show notes about the great things going on at the National Center for Clinical Practice and Educator Preparation. They can also learn about the great things that you're doing to serve the College of Education and Human Development at Texas A&M College Station. Any final thoughts before we close out today?
Chris, I would just thank you and thank you for taking on the challenge of this podcast. I think it's important. It's a great example of what we can do. A challenge I would have to all of your listeners is write a letter to the editor about the great things that you've witnessed in your own local school. Talk about the teachers, talk about a great experience that your own child had. Those stories matter to the collective. We can right this ship in terms of the way that societies learn to badmouth education. Education's a pretty incredible profession that deserves to be paid better in this pluralistic societies. I think but we have to build that case, and we're in the process of doing so. And so, Chris, thank you for the invitation to join your podcast and doing what you can to help society understand, kind of pull that magic curtain back and help us understand what happens in our day to day in our classrooms. So, thank you.
Well, thank you. And to our listeners, thank you as always, and appreciate the time that you take to invest in yourself and to listen and now watch this podcast. So very appreciative. And as always, thank you, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Chris.